it's blocking out a calendar date. It's convincing friends to come with you and thusly convincing them to buy as well. It's setting up a ride. It's potentially going way out of town on like a Tuesday. It's potentially taking a night of work off. Like there's so many opportunity costs to where it's really a feat in my mind if you can sell a ticket.
And it's like, good luck with that.
Yeah.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by Indepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to Creative Juice. I am your host, Corrin Campbell. With me is my co-host, as always, Jack. How's it going, Jack?
It is going wonderful today. I'm so excited about this episode. Are you ready?
I'm super ready because we don't just have two people. Bam, bam, bam. We have three. So this is the first guest that we've had, I think, since Cirque is no longer hosting this podcast. So I'd like everybody to welcome our own Jesse Gillenwalters.
Hello, everybody.
Yay!
Yay!
Round of
Thank
applause.
you so much.
This is where all the YouTubers put in like the confetti and the children yaying, you know? So, but yeah, we're bringing Jesse on because we're talking about, we've been talking a little bit about live streaming and, how that's working out. And obviously that's what everyone's doing right now. And nobody's touring, obviously. And some tours have been pushed as far as next year. There are shows that have been, tentatively scheduled for the fall, right? I believe Coachella moved theirs to the fall, and we shall see what happens with all of those and see if they actually happen based on what's going on. But there's a lot of stuff that you can do in the meantime because the world is going to open back up, right? Things may look different when we get to the other side, but eventually playing music live, if that's something you were doing before, it's going to be something you do again, right? And so there's a lot of things that we like to have in our ecosystem to make sure that you're not touring and playing to no one, right? So I thought, Jesse has experience touring as basic printer. He's also revamping our selling tickets training into just a beautiful new kind of monster that I'm really excited for everyone to see. But I thought he would be an excellent guest to come in and kind of talk to us about his experiences. So Jack, you're looking at this from an agency perspective. Obviously, some of your clients have had to cancel festivals and cancel tours. So how have you been seeing this impact your efforts at IndieX, and what have you been doing in the meantime?
From the agency side of things, for a number of artists who have had either shows canceled or had to cancel festival dates or something like that, a lot of what we've been working on doing is, well, for one, as I mentioned on previous episodes, a number of our artists have actually pivoted some of their tour dates into live stream, like weekend style tours, and hung out with their fans over a stretch of days. So we've seen a lot of our artists kind of take that direction with it as a way to just continue to engage with their fans, be there with them, especially through these challenging times, offer them, some sense of entertainment and relief. So that's been really cool. A lot of our artists have also been diving into collaboration efforts with other artists doing live streams that they're, friendly with. That's been really cool to see. But from a data perspective, we've just been kind of stepping back and saying, like, what are the things that you need to do at this point to prepare for when you're going back on the road? So we've, taken a step back into audience building at the top of the funnel, and really diving into where your fans are hanging out so that when you go back to planning tours, where are the right places to do it? Building up your lists, getting opt-ins. We've kind of taken a step back to looking, a little bit more holistically about the prep work that you should be doing all the time when it comes to touring, but especially now when going back into things is likely going to look different than what it did before March of 2020. And I'm putting that timestamp in there so that, there's something for us to listen back to.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like there are things that are part of the buddy system and part of the eco structure or the ecosystem, I suppose I would say, that we would always recommend that you're doing all the time, And there's definitely, it can be distracting as you are launching different products and you're doing a tour and you've got the music. I mean, heaven forbid we're working on music sometimes, right? So there's a lot of stuff to kind of tackle. And, people right now are in a very reactive mode, which is like, oh crap, like I can't play a show, I can't tour. And I know Jesse has had, some of his friends even, having this kind of panic mode. So Jesse, what do you think? I mean, how have you been preparing for this, whether on purpose or accidentally? Because obviously I don't think you forecast the pandemic happening, but, what have you seen from the people in the Nashville scene that, what is the conversation like about live shows in general?
Yeah, well, it's been really interesting. I think the default and perhaps obvious response has just kind of been like not necessarily ignorance, but a lack of knowledge. I guess that's ignorance, but just people feel paralyzed, I feel like everyone just stopped themselves in their tracks and were like, I don't know what to do. Like shows were the only thing I knew how to do. And then, I feel like a lot of people cut away to kind of conventional sort of live streaming, and just did, whatever they could. And there's been a lot of sort of floundering, so to speak, not to anyone's discredit, but I think it just, to people that have not heard the good news of all the digital marketing stuff you can do in any kind of weather, so to speak, it feels really hopeless for a lot of people. So that's really been the sentiment. And for me, it was just sort of like, okay, well, I got all these videos I can run. I got all these videos I can make in this new context. For me, it was there was almost when you have this kind of base of knowledge and you have assets and some kind of an audience to work with, there's an opportunistic kind of element to this of like, well, I know how to make videos in my house. I know how to push these around, to my audience. There's almost an element of being kind of, free to do this almost without competition. That's kind of how I felt, was like, right. Well, perfect. I'll take to the ad space and make some cool new videos while I have time. and while people are not advertising I'll be kind of the show in town on the internet for these next few months.
Yeah. Well, especially because I think, and Jesse and I have talked about this in the Nashville office, right? Where it's like, there is kind of this like, I don't know, there's an idea that, when we get out of where we are, and actually I saw a mural making more of a political statement about this, but I think there's also some truth here in Nashville. There's a mural that was like, we're not going to go back to normal, right? Like the return to our lives before all of the things that have been happening, both biologically and socially over the last, especially the last couple of months, the awareness about all of this stuff, there's not going to be the same normal to return to. That's just not how things are going to be. A pandemic, yes, like we've hit this huge cursor, but in the history of, all kinds of viral problems that we've had in the world, it never goes away in a season, So there will probably be adjustments in shows and how we still congregate, right? There will be a lot of adjustments. And so we've talked about how it's quite feasible that we will start looking back at art created in this time and know inherently, even though nobody's saying it, nobody's writing some people are writing songs that have coronavirus in it, but not tasteful ones, like not art that we're going to look back on, right? That's a little too timely, but there are going to be certain things where, songs about being alone or being sequestered in a way, right? Quarantine has even popped up as a word in some songs that I feel like it's a little, I don't know if it's tasteful or not, but it's there. And so there will be a way that we are looking at art and the presentation of music and all of the creative arts really in a different kind of sense, right? Because it's going to have an air of the time, whether or not it's purposely embed into it. So that's something that I think is, this is where creatives who are independent, it's like no one's used to seeing flashy billboards from you or, $1 million music videos, right? Like everyone was forced to go where the independents have been for all of this time, Yeah. And so I feel like that's really going to further independence efforts if they're doing it creatively and doing it correctively. It's like, okay, well, now we're even more on a level playing field, if not us being better than what's happened in a lot of the industry, because there's no, show and lights to kind of distract from the art that's happening. So I think that that's actually really exciting and gives us yet another way to edge out, right? Because we've already talked about how independent, if you know some things about digital marketing, you're probably doing it better than some labels in management, because we see bad examples of that all the time in the major industry. So, Jesse, as far as what you've been doing since everything shut down, I know you had at least 1 or 2 shows scheduled in May, right? And those got canceled?
Yeah, I had a local show in March that was like the first weekend of cancellations. Oh my gosh,
was it March?
Yeah. The first.
I was thinking May.
May as well.
Yeah.
I had 2 dates on tour in May and then 1 locally in March. All of them got wiped out. And 1 in July. That's going to be. That has been since removed as well.
Yeah. So how are you addressing that with your fan base, and what adjustments have you made? Like, if you guys look back in some previous episodes, like Circa and I have talked about Jesse's ads for Basic Printer, and they are creative. Some of his events retargeting has been just genius. He's been really great at tracking his ticket sales, and he's really done it in like the Indepreneur way, as far as I'm concerned. So obviously that's a big part of your brand. So how have you shifted and adjusted to this, and how are you presenting it to your audience in a way that feels authentic?
Well, I think it's a funny, I guess I kind of have a non-response to this that has a kind of a larger lesson.
We love those.
The best kind of responses are non-responses.
Right.
What's funny is that, it's really highlighted to me something I'd always felt, which was just that the live shows segment of my efforts are very much separate from my digital, I guess, kind of evergreen presence. And I find that there's distinctly different bases for each of those. It doesn't necessarily connect back around easily, right? That's kind of binding these things all together is really tough. So I've found that up to now, I've been working this live show angle, and it's kind of been almost its own isolated front, separate of how well anything else goes. And so with that out of the way and just focusing on digital, shorthand for non-live efforts, I've found that it's like, well, yeah, I mean, this is a time to lean into this, lean into content, and lean into e-com, right? So it's like suddenly...
Yeah, there's plenty to do over here.
Yeah, and it's expensive to do live shows, and again, it's its own front. But now I'm forced to lean into this other side and see maybe if I push here on this side a lot more intentionally and in a more serious manner, maybe I can find some breakthroughs on how to easily just pull people aside into the live scenario, rather than running both concurrently and trying to sort of connect them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So do you feel like this process of having to lean in has also opened up, are you thinking about it the same ways before and now you just have more time? Or has there been some kind of epiphany that's happened because your brain has been let loose into this without, worrying about selling out a show? Or, how has that kind of impacted you in those efforts?
I think that there's a theatrical live, obviously, element to a show, like an energy that I provide that is very much distinct to that experience. And it's made me really think about how can I take that energy and put it in a digital realm And it's making me think more about
Very cool.
what kind of videos can I run that aren't just performances, but performances videos with some kind of, pomp and circumstance to them, or some kind of, light narrative, or some, where it's still kind of what we tout as being a good video ad, but almost having more of a theatrical element to it to bring this lore, I guess, around what I'm doing, because and combining it more of like, everything I do here on this digital front will have this exciting live, like, what's next sensibility, rather than it just being like a collection of nice assets. So that's kind of more where my mind has gone lately, I think.
That's really cool. I feel like something that's really distinct about how you do marketing for your artistry is you've always, on all the assets that I've seen from you, is you always bake in, like Corrin was saying, you have like a culture with your fans. So it's interesting to hear that like this situation of not being able to play shows has almost given you the space to double down on that and say, where was that not coming across, or how was that not coming across enough, and how can I really, really lean into it now?
Yeah.
I'm really excited to hear, what the fruits of that are, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months from now, to say like,
Right.
what does that leveling up in terms of that creativity do for you? Because that's something, we talk about how creativity and ads and marketing in general should overlap, and inform each other, but so often they don't. And even when they do, you're rarely presented with opportunities to keep going, to go like the next step, So I think it's going to be really cool to see how that all turns out.
Yeah, that's another really interesting perspective, because, I've played possibly 1,000 shows in my life. Like, I've played a lot of shows, and I've done a lot of performances that weren't shows, that were just like one-offs or national anthems or whatever. And I realized, something that we talked about a lot when I was touring and I had a band, they were extremely dependent on the energy coming from the room. So like when we would tour to like Coral Gables, Florida, it was like a crazy freaking dance club in there. Like the teachers weren't like, sit down. Like everybody was just screaming and rushing the stage and using their phones and all in it. And then sometimes we would play like in Columbia, Missouri, and it'd be like dead. They would just watch. And I would be like, man, and when I first started that job, I was like, man, they must really not have liked the show very much. Like their energy was just, there was nothing to feed off of. And it turned out they loved it. That was just how culturally they expressed interest, was to like calmly watch, And so I think as musicians, especially if you listen to bigger artists talk about touring, some of it is like fanfare, literally, because it's for the fans to be like, yeah, I love touring. I get to connect with my fans face to face. But like, there is a true sense of that, right? Especially in the rock world. But overall, I think a lot of artists really feed off of the energy of an audience. And so one thing that I had to get with, when my band started to come on the road with me, and I saw them being super dependent on the energy in the room. I was like, look, we have to be larger than life. We need to project enough energy to fill that room. Yeah. We can't rely on their energy. And if we project all that energy and some of it comes back to us because they're stoked, we don't have to work as hard. But the standard should be that we're performing enough to fill the whole room if they do nothing.
So great.
And I think that that's something that artists struggle with on live streams and in their advertising. Is like, how do you project your personality, your creativity, your energy into the room or through a lens, essentially, with no one there to cheer you on? And I hope that this whole, phase that we're in will allow people to kind of search within themselves and find that way to project, because it is going to impact how well you perform live. You will no longer be dependent on people in the room. And when they do bring you good energy, you're going to match it and exceed it. And then they're going to go and you're going to go, and it's just going to like accelerate up like a mountain. So I think that that's a cool kind of point to make, is that this is going to, hopefully help people really isolate like, wow, I need to put more into my marketing, because how I am on stage versus how I am in my advertising is either a totally different person, or not enough energy, or doesn't really reflect enough of me.
Yeah.
So so I think that's a really good point. So Jesse, with obviously, so you're not touring right now, but when you were redoing the selling tickets training, and this is what's so interesting, right? We talked about the selling tickets training. It's still a great training in Indie Pro, but it's something that we've been wanting to revamp for a while. It is one of the earlier trainings from, the inception of Indie Pro, and it's had some updates. Obviously, we keep everything updated in there, but it really did need a full-on revamp. And Jesse was a great candidate for that, because he's done a lot of touring, a lot of selling tickets, But what's interesting is, even though we planned for that training to be revamped, that was before touring was not possible.
Right.
So when Jesse started outlining it and shooting it, I was stoked to see that he was talking a lot about, the preparation and how you build these audiences. So really the way I saw it is like, there are 3 distinct kind of audiences that we wanted to serve in this training, which I think Jesse has done splendidly. And one is the local person who has not yet toured, who wants to have successful live shows in their local market. And, we obviously talk about advertising in a wide sense, right? Like multiple countries, or for sure one entire country. That doesn't, if you're just advertising to your local market, that can get very expensive. But there are situations where it makes sense. So Jesse, just, kind of reviewing in your mind how you put this training together, what do you think are some important points for people who are trying to build a locality to where they are?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing to say about selling tickets to live shows and getting started is that it's one of the hardest things to do, I would say. And that's something that we say at the top of the training, is like selling a CD online. It can feel difficult if you're new to Indepreneur, and it absolutely is. It's a very frictional action. It's kind of like the end goal of, in a lot of contexts, what we're talking about. But even that is a lot more achievable than selling a ticket, because everything that comes with that purchase is the ticket purchase is a lot more inconvenient. It's blocking out a calendar date, it's convincing friends to come with you, and thusly convincing them to buy as well. It's setting up a ride, it's potentially going way out of town on like a Tuesday, it's potentially taking a night of work off. Like, there's so many opportunity costs to where it's really a feat, in my mind, if you can sell a ticket.
And that's also why we say that it's like an ascension purchase, right? Like, a lot of people, the first thing they try to sell people will be a ticket. And it's like, good luck with that, because, if they haven't ever, even if they're on your mailing list and, you've kind of talked to them some, but you haven't been nurturing them a lot, it can be very difficult that the first thing they do is buy a ticket, because of all these things that Jesse has outlined, right? And so we typically look at tickets more as an ascension thing. Like, you're already invested, you've probably already bought something from me. The next thing that makes sense would be to, meet IRL, right? You do all these other things first. So yeah, I think that's a good point to highlight.
Yeah. A lot of what I talk about in the training that plays to that as well is just not being afraid to get really, really grassroots in your approach. I think a lot of it, again, if you're just stepping out into live shows and locally, you're going to find that like setting up this automated ad system and just watching people roll through it will not be what it's about. There's a lot of skepticism, again, there's a lot of friction to this, someone coming to the show, like from the point of hearing about you. I kind of set it up to expect lots of conversations and almost set up for to gain conversations in comment sections and Messenger and through email, and almost living in that world for longer than you'd think before really getting into selling tickets in a conventional manner.
Yeah. And so that's great because that means people could start doing this now.
Yes.
Even though we can't play shows
Absolutely.
right now. So yes, you should start now. Okay, got it.
Laying that framework, that's great.
Definitely. So what kind of things have you done? Obviously you've played in Nashville, you've had good shows here, but you've also toured to other locations. So what kind of preparation did you do / would you recommend, or some of both, to people who have played locally and are doing great there, but are trying to build audiences and looking where to tour in the future?
I think, it's about, for sure, kind of garnering, like I just said, some conversations. And in my experience, the tour dates that I would schedule that I knew were, high probability for going well, just based on like history, or like, I'd spent a lot of time there. I had a good base of friends there to kind of work off of. Those, I had some kind of a little bit of gas in the tank per se to work with in those markets out of the box. Like I had some guaranteed revenue that I could pour back into ads. I had some people that I could, converse with that had tips or something like that, or had other people that would come through. But in the dates where it was kind of sparse, what really ended up saving me would be like, I would run a Messenger ad retargeting a video ad. And if I got one good conversation out of that, and I was talking with this fan and they seemed really into it, and, I could get them to really commit to that show, they would show up with 3 other people and all of them would buy merch and they would be excited. It would be like, the big show for them. Like, we've been waiting for this for 3 months. And that can almost float a date sometimes for you. If it's a rough date, if you're able to make this one really great fan that's in it, that can be really good. Unfortunately, I haven't really been able to. The last time I toured in a major way was kind of later on in 2018. Since then, my list has grown a ton, and things like that. I've really gone more into this digital side. I'm interested moving forward.
When you're releasing an album soon, right?
Yes.
So it would make sense for you to tour that album after it comes out.
Totally. Which I might be poised to do that, hopefully. But I have
eventually.
Right. I'm curious to take this list, this much larger list of customers, much larger email list, and kind of go for the conversations at the start. If I have 10 people in Louisville, Kentucky, now I can just, make room and make time to talk with literally all 10 of them and just see what resources I have, because these advocates, again, this Ascension product, if we can discern who in our fan base are advocates, we should start there, because they're already up there. They're already so
they'll recruit people to come to your show.
Right.
Yeah. That totally makes sense.
It's working a really interesting angle of the buddy system when you're going after, customers and you're talking about advocacy. That's really going way deeper into the advocacy stage of the buddy system. People that are willing to literally go out on a limb and get their friends to buy a ticket from you and come out to a show. That's, and I think doing that in a hand-to-hand kind of way, like you're suggesting, is super interesting, Jesse. And I think it shows the dedication and exemplifies it, what you need to do, especially if you're starting out at a smaller level, that it really requires to make this sort of thing work, that it's not just an automated plug and play sort of system,
Yeah, I just want to be realistic too. I feel like from the Indepreneur frame of mind. It's like in an ideal world, we have this really great system and we're super ninja about it. And we have this clairvoyance, like we know we can project things and it's just like automatic and perfect and sales are rolling in. And that's like so key, and definitely having that in place where it makes sense is awesome. But I do want to be realistic about selling tickets. It's a hard, as we've been saying this whole time, it's a hard thing to achieve. And so I think that it really takes rolling your sleeves up and getting very hand to hand, as we like to say, for your average indie who's going to face this big task of like, let me sell 30 tickets to the show, right? I think I want to be realistic about saying like, I think you'll find out that the automation in a general sense breaks down, and it really is worth you coming through as you are manually a lot of times.
Right. And I remember that when we were, Jesse and I had brainstormed some because he was planning these shows and he was looking at touring. And I go back to where I always go, which is like, well, what is the data telling you? And, figuring out your markets. And I know that, and I wanted to get kind of like your after action review, so to speak, because I know that we kind of brainstormed building certain markets, right? Like you've got a speckling of dates that are in a region, but not that close to each other, where you've got these fans and you feel pretty confident, but then there's like a space between.
Yeah.
And like you could lose money that night, or you could try to build an audience there, which generally is not going to happen after you've already booked the date, right? And there could be like two options, like maybe you play Buffalo, but maybe you play Syracuse, and those are in between your dates. So like, which one do you pick? Mm-hmm. You don't really have a clear front runner in either of them. So, we were, I basically was working with Jesse on his PD one time, and we brainstormed some, regional testing and figuring out how to build up audiences before the dates were even booked. And so this could be interesting to bands that are maybe not looking at doing a nationwide tour, but are looking, outside of their own city. So can you share a little bit more details about how you ran that, what kind of results you saw generally?
Yeah. So what we had ended up doing was sort of, again, running a fan finder, a lead video ad to gain interest in my music to like the entire US pretty much. And then, we ran that for a while and then looked at, like these states are really where it's happening. So then I would look at those states and say, well, I'm not going to go all the way out to California, and I'm not going to go as far as Florida or something to that effect. Let's focus on just these hot states, right? Then we focused the budget just on those. Then we were looking at designated marketing area, so regions around major cities, or I guess cities in general in these states. And, without getting exhausted.
DMA regions, which like Facebook will show you, like you could, when you look at the breakdowns of your ads in the United States, these are only in the United States, but instead of breaking it down by state, which could be like in Kansas, that could be opposite ends of a very large state, right? Or in California, like Sacramento and LA are not close. So, but what you can do, and we've talked about DMA regions on this podcast before, but just to retouch for those of you who are not familiar, DMA markets were built around old school radio and television. So like the Minneapolis, head news crew, there'd be a certain like jurisdiction, and they don't just do a bird's eye radius, right? Because they're thinking about, okay, if this Ford dealer wants to advertise to say Atlanta, there are certain places that are easy to get to Atlanta because it's right off the freeway from this other city. But we wouldn't include something else that's nearby, especially when you start getting into like the Northeast, right? Like the difference between Rhode Island and Massachusetts and Connecticut and New York and New Jersey. And, those start to get really kind of crazy. Like, do they have to cross a bridge to come, to come to your business? So this is kind of what
Philadelphia, where I'm from, is just like that. You cross a bridge and you're in Camden. You cross a bridge and you're in Delaware.
Right. you know? And so like the Camden market is included in Philadelphia, for example. But like the Baltimore, DC area is, considered one big lump. However, in like New York, it separates out in a way that you may not expect. So this is a much more accurate way to look at markets in the US versus doing like a radius within certain miles of blah, blah, blah. Like a DMA is a far more accurate way to look at that. So you can, if you want to look at your existing ads now, you can go into Ads Manager under breakdowns and separate it by DMA region, again, which will only show for the United States. Or you can do what Jesse's about to get into, which is target certain DMAs. So sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to make sure we didn't lose anybody on that point there, Jesse.
All in all, where I was going was basically looking to discover which DMAs were my best responding DMAs, and then just stick to those and kind of build a tour route around those. So some of those DMAs were places I'd been, that I had emails in, I had friends in, and some, or most, I guess I should say, which is surprising, I had not been there, but I had good kind of data coming from there. So then the idea was to just put a daily budget on all these DMAs for months, basically, months before I book a tour, and follow up with them with as much as I could, with education content, so other videos, links to my podcast, links to Spotify and things like that, just to get them in the kind of environment that I was building. And then eventually look at who's responding to that and try to get their email or try to make a sale or something like that. And basically I wanted to get around 20 leads within each DMA before I booked a show there. And this was such a long tail effort that coronavirus actually cut it off for me. So like was running it for, 5 months, and then stuff was shutting down. So I shut it off. But one thing I really learned about it was that budget is a huge thing when you're trying to put out this many feelers, and trying to give each consideration, each DMA enough love, right? It's not just like $2 on the campaign and say, spread this around amongst 10 different areas effectively. It's like, it kind of, this is another thing that can be unfortunately prohibitive, is, like you might be looking at $20, $50 a day if you can really spin it, something to that effect. But I think where that bleeds in is to say, your ongoing efforts that you can do, during coronavirus or not, will bleed into this touring effort if you want to guide it that way. But like setting up your introductory assets, your education assets, that's essentially what I was doing. I was just trying to guide it towards a specific tour route. Now I've been going more global with it. The green light countries, of course, when I say global,
of course.
and I'm able to sit on a budget that's comfortable, and I just have the long game ahead. During this whole coronavirus time, I can really come out of it and be like, well, these DMAs ended up working out well, whether or not in a more unbiased test. So there's a few different ways to do it, I think. But when you get into geolocated targeting, it gets a little tricky.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think that with those touring ads that you ran in these DMAs, did you generate some of those fans that, like, when you were saying like you might just need like one person to show up with 3 friends?
Yeah.
Were you able to kind of close in on that in these different DMAs that you were targeting?
Absolutely. I was running at a budget that didn't allow it to really kind of explode in a quick way. But once I was getting moving, maybe like January or so, with this kind of second and third layer retargeting, I was starting to get a handful of customers, and these people would be just holistically like, I'm locked in, you know what I mean? Like they would be replying. It really paid off in that way. And what's funny, these are the people that when I tour, I could just email and be like, yo, I'm coming to your, near you, like,
and they're like, where do I buy?
And it's just a matter of like, how can I,
take my money.
What's funny is that as I've moved into, I was planning to release an album anyway, but I've been able to focus more squarely on that. These people from this touring thing are like showing up in my sales efforts now. So now I'm actually kind of getting a second pledge from them, so to speak. They're ascending the buddy system a little bit more than they even would have. So that's a cool benefit as well.
So that hits our like local guy trying to go regional, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the top tier of this, and I mean not top tier because we're not talking about worldwide touring or anything, but once we get to artists that have toured and will tour again, right? Even our people who have hosted retreats or have thrown festivals, right, in the IndieX agency. This is where we start to get a little bit wider view, right? So, Jack, what's the buzz with the artists that are in IndieX right now that had touring efforts and paused them? Or, what are you recommending that they do to prepare? What are the differences when you're talking about maintaining a, tour audience and kind of trying to keep them propelled and generating revenue or just keeping their interest in for when things open back up?
That's a good question. And it's an interesting one because I think there's a number of ways to skin the cat,
oh my
so
gosh,
to speak.
you have just the least PETA-friendly turns of phrases. We were talking about boiling frogs a couple weeks ago. I'm not even a PETA activist. I'm just like, wow.
Well then, on that note,
Nothing
not to
on
beat a dead
cats.
horse,
Oh my
but it's
Yeah, no, I can take that better than I can take skinning a cat. Sorry, I got one on my arm. She's the best thing in the world. So as long as it doesn't involve cats, cats on the internet, it's a thing. You can't do that.
I'll take that to heart. I promise.
Yeah, please. Yeah. Noted.
But very seriously, there's a lot of ways to approach this, and a lot of it depends on what you're doing and what your audience is about, and how you've kind of communicated with them in the past. So, not to go on and on and on about it.
Please do.
But one thing, that just comes back to content as a whole is, of the people that are used to seeing you live and coming to your shows, and maybe they had tickets booked for your upcoming tour that got canceled, don't just forget about them, right? Like you need like, just as much as you put content out for your online audience, focusing in on those people and nurturing them very specifically, especially if you've got emails and you've got them segmented appropriately. Putting some nurturing efforts into your marketing for those people, I think, can be really, really helpful. And that's something that I'm totally recommending to artists at this point, is like, give them a little something because they wanted to see you and now they can't. So give them a little love.
I think, would have been cool. Like, I bought tickets for the Hayley Williams tour when she was releasing this new record, and that obviously got shut down. And just as you were talking there, I realized like, oh, what if you like had this tour planned and you had all your dates and like you've got your customer list and you like send them a postcard 2 days prior to the day that you were going to tour there. And you're like, I'm so sorry that we're not hanging out right now, or things like that. Like, it's just letting people know like, you're bummed, but I'm also bummed, and we'll be bummed together. And here's some things we can do in the meantime. And then like, give them an exclusive link to like a private live stream or something, like it's stuff like that I just wish that more artists were doing with this opportunity to be like, we're in this together. It totally sucks, but it's going to be okay. And here's something else in the meantime, because I'm not just going to go ghost on you,
Definitely. And I think that also applies to artists that are, running their own festivals, retreats, whatever it might be. If those kinds of things are getting canceled, or especially if they're getting postponed, whether you have a date picked or not, the customers that have already bought and the people that you're, nurturing towards a purchase for that sort of thing, don't just leave them hanging as you're trying to figure out the logistics of what you're going to do next. I know it's just one extra thing to add to your plate, but seriously, like taking the extra care to let those those ticket buyers know, hey, like we're working on this, we're gonna make it happen, and it's gonna be better than ever. I can't wait to see you there.
Right.
We specifically at IndieX have one artist on board that had to reschedule a festival that they were hosting on location at the studio that they work out of, and a lot of our work in nurturing those people who had already picked up a ticket has been, getting the messaging out there that like, hey, this is going to be really cool, and you know what, like we're going to make it extra special because we had to push it back. And I think that that's important. I think that that's really important. So that's something that we've been really kind of harping on quite a bit. In addition to things like, just generally speaking, making things a little bit extra special for your fans and giving them something to do on the nights that they would have been hanging out with you, doing the live stream tour kind of setup like I talked about on one of the previous episodes. Just kind of replacing that night with a little bit of hangout, whether it's private or whether it's public. There's so many ways to do it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's something that, especially if you are managing your own tickets, like obviously like the Haley Williams tour was sold, I believe, through TicketWeb for the Brooklyn Bowl venue here, which is new. And like I barely got communication. I mean, I knew that it was canceled, but they obviously like there was when everyone was started canceling, it was a very like slow action kind of thing because everyone was like, I don't want to pull the trigger on this unless like it's a thing. Okay, it is a thing. Okay, so now we need to do this, and so obviously I heard from socials that was canceled before anything else, and then they actually TicketWeb still sent me a email reminder to download my tickets 2 days prior to the show. And I was like, gosh, what a missed like the show that was canceled. It's like, what a missed opportunity. You could have just changed that automation and made it something cool. And that's not on the artist, that's TicketWeb. But if you are selling your own tickets, first off, make sure you're not doing that. Secondly, I think it's a really good, you don't want people coming back and being like, I want a refund, or like if they're not sure if they can make it now, if it's been rescheduled or even if it hasn't, right? If you don't continue to nurture that, there will be people that try to come back and get refunds or are just like, oh, I'm not excited about it anymore, which could still impact turnout, even if it doesn't impact revenue. So there's definitely a lot of things that you don't want to try to sell them more things as much as you want to be like, yeah, let me affirm that what you did was wise, and it'll still be a really great thing for you to follow through on when all of the dust settles on this. So I think that's if you are an artist who is currently trying to work that stuff out, that needs to be the narrative, I think, is that, I'm not going anywhere. We're just going to wait this thing out. You and I are both waiting. And in the meantime, let me give you, something special. And I think, there's a lot of like public live streaming happening, obviously, like even bigger artists are doing it. But if you can do something that is very specific to your customers, or especially anybody who purchased tickets for a live event of some kind, like giving them something special and closed and private, is really going to kind of feed back that goodwill vault, even though you didn't make the coronavirus, like this isn't, it's not like you're like, oh, I have exhaustion, I need to cancel this tour date, right? Like this is something out of your control, but it still just shows as the artist your like sincere desire to have really spent that time with them when you do something very special for people like that.
Yeah, I think two quick little points on exactly that as well. Creating opportunities for risk reversal for your fans can be really helpful here. One of our artists, the same one that was hosting the festival at their place, what they did was for the rescheduled date, they said to any fans, hey, like if you purchased and you can't make this date, like rest assured your ticket is valid for next year. For next year's date. So they made it so that ticket that they purchased for this year, even if they can't make the rescheduled date, is acting as, their first place in line for next year's festival. So it kind of serves two purposes, gives people, a reason to still be excited about something and, mark a future date on their calendar, but also, it'll help to potentially minimize the number of refund requests or chargebacks or anything like that. And then this, the second thing, kind of going off what you were saying, Corrin, was like, right now in these times, like I've seen so many artists grandstanding and trying to put up a particular public image. And not that that's unimportant, and I don't mean to sound like I'm lacking compassion towards artists and what they're going through right now, because I totally get it. I mean, we're seeing it so much at the agency and in the community and at Indepreneur. But I will say, put just as much effort, if not more, into, your public facing appearance with, your fans and the people that you're trying to just generate awareness with, as you are with the people who are your customers and are, paying to come to your shows. Mm-hmm. Go that extra mile there, because I promise you that will do way more for you and for, your fans than, tweeting or, changing a Facebook banner or something like that. I think that you can talk to people about how much you care about, what's going on with the coronavirus and the world right now. You can tweet about that all you want. But for your fans that have invested in you, take the extra step to invest some more of your time into them. I think that it's easy to forget that when we're so dialed into social media and what we look like. Don't forget that there's people that are deep into your ecosystem that need to be paid, a little bit of extra attention to.
Right. And it's that whole thing that we say about not to be a megaphone, but to be the opening of a conversation, right? Don't just have everyone watching you. Invite them to participate in your artistry and in your message and everything that's going on. And especially people who have given you money. Yeah. It's, obviously something where it's look, you made the right decision. I'm still here. You didn't invest in a startup that went dead. So it's definitely a really important thing to just keep giving back to those folks in the meantime. So that's a lot of chat about something that we have no idea what's going to happen. The number of press releases and newscasts and, people who have their opinions about what's going to happen or what's not going to happen or when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen or how it's not going to happen. It's exhausting, right? So we wanted to at least come to the podcast with something that helps you plan if you are expecting to do a local live show, a regional tour, a larger tour, if you have any kind of live events. There's still a lot of work that you can do right now to build for when that time is ready. And you have to keep in mind too that when things do open back up, there's going to be a lot of saturation. There's going to be a lot of indies and a lot of bigger artists trying to fight for holds on certain days in certain markets. A lot of people are going to be trying to hit the road because that's their main income. So if you have tons of fans or you have a list that you can say to a venue, look, I know that I can bring this many people to a show because I have nurtured this audience and they're ready to go, that can eke you out on a venue hold if you need it. So
laying that groundwork right now could be something really help you when we go into this, whatever the new normal of touring and live shows looks like.
For sure. So do that work now. And so that's why I'm really stoked for the new selling tickets training. I think there's a ton that training is also going to contain a ton of things that maybe can't be acted upon in this moment, but understanding how you can retarget people and run good ads and make sure you're tracking and, all of the things that do come after when this opens up. But none of that can be applied until you have the audience. And so I think this training is it's going to work even though we can't tour right now. There's a lot of stuff in it that's very viable and that really should be done for months or even years before you do the rest of it anyhow. So I'm super stoked. And obviously Jesse is a charming young man and he's very entertaining. And so that's part of the fun in the training as well. So now you get to see his face on this podcast and get a little preview of what that's going to be like.
There it is.
There it is. All right, Indies. Well, that is our episode for today. I hope that you have high hopes for your future tours and that you feel motivated to go out, keep that audience engaged, and find more of your new audience. And that's all for today. Thanks so much for joining us, Jesse. I was really happy to have you.
So welcome. So fun to hang out with both of you.
Yeah, such a blast having you. Thanks for joining us, Jesse. Thank you, Indies, for listening in, and we'll see you next time.